5:02 p.m. here. Welcome everyone. Item A, Zoom meeting information. If we're here, that was successful. Item B, roll call. I am here. Ned?
Present.
Randy?
I'm here.
John?
Present.
Stephanie?
Present.
Amy?
Present.
Corey?
Present.
I don't see Julia. I hadn't heard from her if she was going to be here or not, so that's not excused. And Mark.
Present.
All right. On to approval of the agenda. Is there a motion to approve today's?
Motion to approve.
By Randy. Do we have a hand? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed say nay. That is approved. On to approval of the minutes from October 20th.
So
Is there a
moved.
motion by Randy,
Second.
by Mark? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? Cool. Thanks, everybody. Okay, so on to regular business. We have an item, discussion and possible action to place additional and different types of bins for the plastic film per the recycling challenge. And that was submitted via
Dave,
communication
can you hear
by Alder Randy.
Okay, I could hear you. No. I could hear you, but you couldn't hear me for some reason. And I got a sustainability commission right now.
Oh, okay. Well,
So-
that was basically it, but they're also.
Go to your mic, Randy.
Okay, thanks. Okay,
I'll talk to you later.
okay, yep, bye.
I believe you're up on deck here for this item.
Yep, sorry, I was multitasking. Sorry.
Yeah, we heard.
Yeah. I don't know if Melissa heard that the fire marshal came through City Hall and the bin we got there for collecting plastic is not allowed.
Really?
Yeah. I just found that out today. I guess it happened just recently. But I had been thinking all along, because there was a time I went to drop off some bags and I couldn't. I was a little too early. And it made me think, I bet there's a lot of people who, their schedules don't really allow for them to dump off. It'd be nice to have something outside. Maybe even a bigger container, maybe even at some garages, at the West Side Garage or something, and just something like maybe even like something the size of like the old St. Vinnie de Paul boxes or Goodwill boxes, or something like that. And then we could have decals on them of the different plastics that are allowed, so it'd be an informational advertising kind of thing, as well as a receptacle. So I know we had this discussion the first time, and I really can't remember everything. I know it was the containers they gave us we needed to find a place for, but I was always hoping that eventually we'd be able to expand and do other things. And now with the fire marshal, it really become a little more imperative to do that. So that's.
Randy, did they say what the years?
I did not get any details other than that the fire marshal came through and said that can't be there.
So it was more location than necessarily the shape or size of the container, probably.
I guess.
Okay.
Mark, are those cardboard containers?
I'm not.
Plastic.
They're plastic? Okay.
I mean, I wouldn't think the containers.
Corrugated plastic.
Yeah, I wouldn't think that would be the issue.
Yeah, I wouldn't either. I mean, and City Hall is not like City Hall is very combustible. I mean, it's in the entryway. I mean, but anyway,
that may have been it. It's entrance and exits.
Could be blocking an exit or blocking up.
No, he didn't say it had to move. He said it had to be out of the building, as I understand it.
Okay.
So,
Yeah, I'd be curious to hear, to actually get specifics in terms of whether it's that it needs to be moved out of the building or because there are problems with putting it outside anywhere, just because of the fact that if it's in any kind of isolated location outside, it's going to become a garbage dump, plain and simple. I mean, that's why we don't have drop-off recycling dumpsters around the county, because they became just garbage for people, places for people to dump garbage. And that's true with the plastic collection sites a lot of times too, is that people end up just dumping anything in there. Plus the places that are collecting the plastic film want them clean and dry. And if you're outside, keeping it dry could be an issue, depending on the type of container. Not to say we couldn't do it, but just to make good locations.
Right.
Yeah, and I doubt you'd want to put one out like at the west side or east side garage. Probably they're supposed to be clean and dry to be recyclable, and odds are if you're putting them out like at the west side garage where you have other collection stuff, it's people are going to put plastic bags in there that they have from, they bring the oil bottles, whatever else, they're going to be pretty gross by the time they're dropped off there. That just based on the experience we've had from recycling drop-off sites over the course of the years. Got to give it a lot of thought, and you got to have somebody who's able to watch it on a regular basis or empty it on a regular basis.
Right, that's what I was kind of thinking, maybe that's what made me think of the garage. I thought that would be enough activity there that, and it'd be out open enough. But, I don't know, wherever.
I don't know if this is probably just anecdotal, but we had a similar issue with the fire marshal telling us not to have our plastic in our hallways. We went to smaller containers that were routinely emptied along at the same time the recycling and trash would be emptied. And then the bulk plastic that we were collecting had to be moved out of the hallway into a loading dock area, still dry, but where there was no concern of flammability or fire issues. And that was really the biggest concern, that they were worried that it's an opportunity that could be a fire hazard.
Is plastic that flammable?
I mean, it'll burn once you get it started quite well.
Wouldn't you need an accelerant or something to get it going? Or I don't know. No? No? Okay.
Just a match.
Just a match. Okay.
Or, or an errant cigarette butt, kind of thing. So
Those butts.
where's Ned?
Yeah. Mhm.
I guess it's worth exploring in terms of if they're seeing what their objections were, and then seeing if there's someplace else that would work and still be visible. Though you want it accessible, visible, and clean, dry kind of location. So who was that?
I don't know if
was that-
Melissa, you could check with, I was just running through City Hall quick. I didn't have a lot of time, and I was actually dropping off some plastic. And one of the maintenance guy told me all about it. And so I didn't get a chance I had to run. So I didn't get the whole lowdown. But I don't know who the fire marshal would talk to. It sounded like it was maintenance. So maybe you could check with them, find out all the details.
I can follow up with maintenance and find out exactly what the conversation was.
Since this is a regular business, should we just motion to refer to staff to figure out would that be the appropriate motion?
Sure, refer to staff and it can come back to us, and then maybe in the meantime, we can figure out some things on our own if everybody's got any ideas. I don't really have any more ideas, sorry. But maybe in the meantime, something will pop in the old noodle. But yeah.
And there are, in terms of your other comment, some kind of description of the types of plastics, there is actually some pretty good brochures or posters and so forth on the plastic film recycling website that actually you can
Right.
print out and
Yeah.
post on things. It gives you some real specifics about some of the other stuff that, people think about the grocery bags by themselves, but, bread bags and plastic
Yep.
case wraps and, laundry, dry cleaning bags, and a bunch of other stuff are also included in that list. And that list they've got pretty nice graphics that are easy to get a hold of, print out and post with the drop off sites. So I think that's something definitely could, pull together as well. If you
Yeah.
can resolve where it's got to go. So, yeah.
Yeah, I think the website's really good. And I
Yeah.
thought it'd be good to maybe, if we could take that and start putting that all over the place with the bins and everything, might be useful. So I make a motion to refer to staff.
I'll second.
All right, motion by Randy, second by Mark. Any questions before a vote? Cool. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed say nay. All right, thanks for bringing that to our attention, Randy, and for looking into that, Melissa. On to informational. We have a number of updates here today. First, item 1, Clean Energy Work Group update. Looks like it's John and I. John, did you want to report?
Yeah, I don't think there's a lot that's happened new since our report out or discussion in front of Common Council. I did send information to Melissa, sort of a spreadsheet showing what we had received from WPS in terms of bills, and then versus what we had already had as a city, to see if we can fill in sort of that discrepancy, because we are missing some bills. If we can get closer to what our true electrical and gas usage is. And we won't know that until, I guess, we sit down with WPS and reconcile that spreadsheet.
Cool, thanks, John. And I guess I don't have a whole lot to add as well. I think in terms of our goal of starting to develop a comprehensive community-wide climate action plan, I think I don't want to speak for Melissa, but just waiting on some really cool grant opportunities potentially. And then additionally on the community-wide energy data beyond just the city's energy data, waiting on that from WPS. So I think those are just kind of the two. Next, I don't know, Melissa, if you want to speak to any of that now or later on with your report.
I'll just save it for my report.
Okay, cool. Great. We'll keep her moving then on to Pollinator Habitat Work Group. Ned.
Thank you. For the first thing on the agenda, it mentions the dark sky, I believe. And that is, the native plant policy. So there are a few municipalities that I've come across around the country that have a requirement for when the actual city itself is putting in plants on publicly owned land, that the default is to use and whether they're doing that for biodiversity, pollinator habitat, water filtration purposes. There are a lot of good environmental reasons to do that. And so as a discussion item tonight, the potential for the city of Green Bay to do something like that, where we would have native plants be what we use to landscape our public areas as a default, unless those areas are going to be used for something else. So I just wanted to hear if the group had any feedback on that idea.
I will start. I think this is a fantastic idea. What I would ask, and the reason why I want to say my comments first before we get too far into the discussion, is if the Sustainability Commission decides to pursue a city policy or an ordinance or whatever form that would take, I would ask that the members of the pollinator work group do the legwork of actually drafting a policy so that we have something concrete to pass along to the Sustainability Commission to further review, and then also so it can move on into one of the standing committees for review and for consideration.
Yeah, absolutely. I think coming with a draft ordinance would be the right move if that's something we're interested in. So, absolutely,
I say get drafting.
get drafted. All right. Corey, did you want to say anything about this?
Sure. I would like to contribute to this conversation. I do like the idea of, you know, potentially drafting a policy of some sort that incorporates more native plants into public lands. I think there's a lot of things that will need to be considered as a policy is being drafted. I think for me, from my perspective, one of the biggest kind of hurdles potentially could be the long-term maintenance of these spaces. And what does that mean as far as how does it compare to what we're currently doing versus, you know, what it might turn into? And I think just the capacity for the city to be able to maintain more native type landscapes could be right now limiting, but we are talking about starting the AmeriCorps program, and perhaps with the development of that program, we could have a bigger capacity to maintain those types of spaces, which could financially, you know, be a benefit to the city long-term. I feel that long-term native landscapes probably are less costly to maintain than, say, like vast areas of turf grass, but I haven't been able to find a lot of good evidence to prove that. So I really think if we're able to put some proof to saying that native plantings can essentially cost the city less money to maintain over time, I think that would go a long way. So I think that's kind of one of the biggest hurdles we would need to get over. I also think and know that some of the public perceives native landscapes as looking unsightly and weedy. I know we've gotten complaints, for instance, of Cooler Place, which is on the corner of Mason and Baird, which is a native planting. It has signage talking about why we have that planting there, but we still get calls saying, why are all those weeds there? The city needs to come clean it up. So I think there would be some education as to why and how these places look the way they do. That being said, too, I think it's important to kind of consider the maintenance of spaces and recognizing that maybe these areas don't need to be maintained to a pristine state. Like, for instance, if you look at our turf grass areas outside of the athletic fields, we have dandelions and other weeds and things, you know, within our turf grass because we don't spray herbicide in those areas. So I think it would to just be some of the education and understanding that some areas, yes, we could try and maintain to a pristine state, but other areas not necessarily be as pristine as some would like. I know too, when we're talking more vast areas of prairies and things like that, that there's public perception that it can bring in more or less desirable, maybe nuisance type animals, such as bees. And so there are concerns with that, where maybe some education of the public, maybe in some cases it does bring those in. I mean, I know voles also damage lawns and things. It just might be something to consider with the public moving forward if they're, I just know it's been brought up, you know, through other discussions with the Parks Department. I think the availability of native plants would need to be considered. So right now, a lot of, I would say the majority of the nurseries probably sell percentage wise, I think a lot of them sell less native plants than I think the majority is non-native of what they sell as far as like kind of from the ornamental aspect. So I think if there were a policy in place, it would be good to try and also work with local nurseries and things to say, okay, we know there's going to be a new demand for this type of plant. Can you help supply that demand? And so, you know, just understand, and there, of course, there are local nurseries who do sell native plants, but I think the majority focus more on non-native. And I think too, getting back to the animals, I forgot to mention also that I worked at a nursery that specialized in native plants and found that although, so we promoted using them in landscapes and a lot of the areas we planted them were kind of more naturalized areas. And I guess just understanding that a lot of the local wildlife likes to eat the native plants, you know, they're kind of evolutionary one and, you know, helping each other out, I guess. And so I think in areas like near to these naturalized areas, and it happens already, even with the non-native plants that, you know, you see that damage from the animals on those plantings. But I think perhaps a consideration in those areas where if you want an aesthetic appearance, you know, to a landscape that perhaps on a plan for something that's not going to get chewed down to the ground and, you know, be able to survive. Oh, and yes, as far as diversity, I do think, you know, having more native plants used would increase diversity, but I also think that it could potentially somewhat limit it as well. You know, like say we're saying we can only use 80% native plants, and then you run into an issue like emerald ash borer, where you wipe out a bigger community of plants because you know, you're just sort of limiting the palette for what you have throughout the city. And then two, I think something that I don't know a whole lot about, but I'm somewhat aware of, is the whole climate change discussion, and how I know some have started talking about, okay, well, do we want to start planting trees that aren't necessarily very hardy in our area right now, but, you know, they're traditionally more hardy further south or something? And does it make sense to try to start establishing some of these trees in this area that aren't historically, you know, native to the area, to help alleviate issues that may arise with climate change? So I'm I mean, I think overall the Parks Department is, I know we're looking to reduce areas of turf grass. You know, it's part of our master plan. And so I think it would definitely be worth exploring. Absolutely. I think it's important just for the city to be able to promote the sustainability and conservation of these historic landscapes, because it's really what makes our region what it is, you know, that historic landscape, and it just helps to create sort of that sense of identity. So I am in favor of it, but I do think there could be some hiccups along the way, but not necessarily anything we couldn't work through.
Thank you for sharing, Corey. Really appreciate those concerns and support as well. Julia, I see Julia's hand, and then a member of the public that we could, oh no, no more Julia, or yes, Julia. Julia, do you want to?
Yes, I'm sorry, I was just lowering it because I always forget later. So I was preemptively lowering it. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Okay. Let's see. Anyway, I just wanted to add yes, and yes to everything Corey said. I totally agree. I just a specific thing she said. I think the first thing I think of is the limiting the plants, or like, how are you going to define native? I think is going to be an interesting question. Maybe that already exists. And then also, so out in terms of limiting could be something really to think about. We should, because I'm not like there's, in addition to some of the things Corey brought up around limiting the plants is, sometimes plants do well for certain conditions, and sometimes plants, the things we like about natives are really like those deep root systems and them not being turf grass and not needing those things. And so there might be like a situation in a right of way that gets a lot of salt or something. And so you want to like think about plants that might be able to survive like certain conditions in certain locations. And so I just think keeping options more open than narrow is really important. So whether it's like, natives, and the whole goal is just to return, kind of get turf grass out and like not use invasive species list, because that list is pretty expensive, would go a long way. I think it's interesting that she brought up about, some of the public or resident concerns. Those happen, I've heard those issues. Bees, definitely an issue. And then the aesthetics. So I'm not so sure it's like trying to educate the whole, there is an element of that, but I think that's kind of futile, honestly. I think it's more about making sure where you're putting stuff, people know what you're doing, and you're getting comments back about what's, you're including people in the discussion ahead of time. So you're not, because otherwise I feel like you might just get a lot of pushback, and then it will be a failed experience all around. So really actually not just treating it like we need to educate them to know better, but more about actually like taking into consideration what people's concerns and issues are.
Recording in progress.
You did it. Thank you. Oh. Okay. Sorry, getting feedback. Okay. And then the maintenance issue, one thing to think about with a lot of the native prairies is regular maintenance requires burning. So depending on what you, that could be an issue potentially with maintenance. I think you just reminded me of that, Corey. In general though, I think this is really a good direction that we've been starting to talk about, but yeah, I think those are my main comments.
Thanks, Julia. I do see a hand up from, I believe, a member of the public, so I'd like to make a motion to open the floor.
Is there a second?
Sorry,
Oh, sorry.
Maria is a city staff member, so I don't know if we have to open the floor.
Okay, I didn't realize that. I'm sorry. We don't.
You don't? Okay. Maria. Take it away.
Maria.
Hello, yeah, so as mentioned by Corey and earlier in this meeting, I'm the new Conservation Corps coordinator, basically working with the AmeriCorps grant, trying to bring some conservation back into the city parks. So just a few thoughts that I had on this topic relating to what Corey had mentioned already. As far as the maintenance aspect, I do see maintenance being a change, but not necessarily an increase in maintenance. As Corey was mentioning, it would be really good to see if there's a cost difference or time difference on mowing a certain area if you do have manicured turf grass versus if you had a native planting. And that possibly could change or be equal to maybe they're not spending an hour mowing, but they're spending an hour doing other maintenance. So that would be very interesting to see. The other thing that I wanted to bring up, so far in this discussion, it mainly sounds like we're talking about prairies, but I do want to bring up that installing some sort of native plant ordinance or the like also includes trees. So that would also include planting more native trees on our streets and in our parks. It doesn't necessarily have to be forb plants when we think about this policy. So that would also include defining native versus hybrid. Are we going to include hybrid trees in this policy, or are we trying to stick with specifically native trees and really defining what that looks like? Just because a lot of trees in city parks are hybrid of their native co-parts. So really defining what that looks like, I think would be really important when drafting this. as far as kind of back to the maintenance, sorry, for as far as burning and prairie burning and restoration, I think we already have a few good examples at Bear Creek Greenway, also on the UW Green Bay campus, where we have done small scale prescribed burns with the public's input as well. And kind of going off of what Julia had said, really trying to involve the public and not necessarily focusing maybe on the education, but making sure that they have an input. Just because as long as they feel as though they're being heard, I tend to find that people in the public are going to be more open to change if they feel like they can have a voice in it as well. So I guess those are my key points in this topic.
So much, Maria. I'm sorry I missed the introduction for you before, but welcome aboard. All right, anybody else wanted to weigh in on the native plant discussion? Okay, then I'll consider the feedback from tonight and work with the Pollinator corridor folks and try to get a draft ordinance for either December or possibly January, so that we can look at that together. I do have another item, don't I? Dark sky. So dark sky, a lot of cities in Wisconsin have done this already. If you're not familiar with the dark sky movement, it's an effort to cut down on light pollution. So a lot of our street lights and other lights are sending light upward instead of just down. And all over the world, there are different laws and ordinances in place to reduce some of that light pollution. And there are several reasons that people have wanted to do this. One is for simply being able to see the night sky, stargazing, hobby astronomy type stuff. Another reason that kind of deals more in our purview be that light pollution can interfere with the activity of nocturnal animals. It can interfere with bird migration, and we at the city of Green Bay are at a confluence of two big pieces of land coming across the bay, where birds fly down, and we are kind of a good flyway route for migrating birds. So there's that, and there's also the pollinator aspect of light pollution, kind of messing with night activity of bats and moths and butterflies and things like that. So the idea, I guess, would be, would we be interested in pursuing a policy where we can try to cut down on the light that we are sending upward? And most areas do this through caps, and I think trying different heights out on lights, trying different types of lighting, different distancing from shiny reflective materials. So it could be a lot of things. It could be one or two things that cities do, but I wanted to bring that forward tonight as a possibility. And I see Juliet, your hand is up.
Yeah, I was just thinking about this the other day before you put it on the agenda, but more from like driving through Green Bay and going, there's no way this would ever. I was just curious, how does we're industrial, we have you're just asking for massive public safety discussions to start happening. I just don't understand where you even start with a city our size and doing this. So when you talk about that as us, a city our size becoming that, what does that actually mean? And how is it even the minuscule thing that we might be able to implement? Is that effective in terms of reducing light pollution for the effort?
Well, I can probably speak to that a little bit as well. I've written a couple of ordinances over up in Door County when I was working in planning up there. I've spent a lot of time working with Fish Creek and Sister Bay on some of these light ordinances on light pollution and dark sky efforts. All lights get replaced at some point is what it comes down to. And as you replace them, they're much more energy efficient and less light polluting ways of replacing those lights. I think John Hart and I just talked about this the other day, that there's I think it's an intersection, one of the intersections in town. I think I was driving down Webster the other night, and there was a stretch where there was a mercury vapor light, the pink ones, the sodium vapor, and an LED light, all in the same block. And if you look at the light scatter from each one of those, it's completely different. But the LED is probably the brightest, shining straight down, but LEDs are very efficient and they're very pointed in their directions. They light up what they're supposed to light up, and they don't scatter light the way, because they're not technically a light, they're a diode. So there's a difference in there. But there are definitely ways of, as municipalities replace their lighting in that they're responsible for along corridors, as business. You look at different gas station canopies over time and see how the older ones have lights that hang below, the newer ones have lights that are flush with the canopy, something like that. Mercury vapor lights are especially in some communities, are just not allowed in residential areas at all, because I find them completely annoying, but they don't mean, from a security standpoint, they may work, may have been the solution in the past, but modern technology, especially again, LED lighting, offers much better solutions and really cuts down on light scatter. So I think this is a great idea. I mean, like I say, I've done some work in the past on ordinances dealing with this, and there are larger cities. Madison and Appleton were two on the list that I think Ned had pulled together from the Dark Sky organization. I took a look at those. There are different rules or different aspects that you can look at for commercial and residential properties in terms of how those lights work. And what the bottom line is, you're trying to get lights that don't cast up, that's not shining light up, it's shining light down, or directional to where you want to light things up. And that can be accomplished really well without a lot of light scatter, and not necessarily darkening up the city, but certainly helping cut back on light pollution. So I personally think this is a great idea. 30 years ago when I moved to Green Bay, I could actually see the night sky, and I know I can't now as nearly as well. So from my backyard, because everybody has lights. But if we could, I'd be willing to help with something along these lines as well going forward, if we want to start drafting some ideas and putting them together.
Thank you, Mark. I saw Melissa and Stephanie and Randy kind of in that order.
Sure. So I have a couple of questions and comments. Ned, when you were initially thinking of this, were you thinking, would this be a community-wide ordinance or a policy for city-owned lights and city-owned lights that are on buildings?
Right. I was thinking of a policy for city-owned lights, municipal operations. I would be definitely willing to hear more about Mark's experience if he has more of kind of a broad perspective on, business lights and things like that. But I was thinking we'd start by looking at our own operations as a city.
Okay. And I did speak with another staff person. I've reached out to several departments that this would, potentially it's going to impact every department. Different buildings have different lights. But, our roadway lighting, that would be something, it's going to be a discussion that DPW would be very involved with, because we maintain all the roadway lighting, whether it's owned by Wisconsin Public Service or whether it's a city-owned roadway light, the city maintains that light. So Mark, to your, one of the things you brought up, you know, you said you saw 3 different types of lights. Well, public service replaces lights as they fail. So they don't necessarily go through all of Webster and say, we're going to do all 85 lights. So that's a lot of times how you see different types of lighting technology as you're driving around. And so a lot of the lighting already, the ones that have been converted to LEDs, some of those are already dark sky compliant. Not all of them. The other thing to keep in mind is that Green Bay has we have lots of different business districts, and there's lots of different decorative lighting that goes in those business districts. So it's not all night sky compliant. So there will be, you know, that's just another thing to keep in mind as we go along, or as you go along. And I would also want to clarify whether this is for all new buildings, you know, if this is a community-wide ordinance or policy, is this going to apply to all new construction, commercial? Is it just for the business community, really? Not so much residential? I think these are all things that really have to be thought through very carefully. And yeah, I'll just leave it at that.
Thank you. Stephanie had her hand up.
My comments were similar to Melissa's. I was thinking in regards to Lambeau Field and Titletown District is probably like the brightest point within Green Bay potentially, especially on game days. I don't know, you know, how much light pollution that gives off, but so I was considering those factors of decorative lighting within our business district that would play a role with this ordinance. So my comments were very similar in regards to that aspect too.
Yeah, and living in I live about 5 blocks from the stadium in the Titletown district, the new stuff. And actually, if you look at that compared to what used to be there, because when I moved in, there was a Kohl's grocery store and a Kmart, and the lighting they had compared to what's out there, even in the new Titletown district, is radically different. Just stand back a little ways, and you actually don't see the glow the way you do. There are, I personally would think that a citywide ordinance is something that I would like to see us explore at some point. Not just a policy for the city, because I think it has a greater impact than just the city's street lighting. The street lighting is great. It's going to happen kind of by default as WPS goes through or the city goes through and replaces lights. Again, LEDs have far lower light scatter than any of the other lighting that's out there. And I don't see a need to, and I don't believe that you could afford to replace every single light along Webster Avenue, let's say, all at one time, though the cost savings may justify it at some point. But I think that if you don't look at it comprehensively from a citywide basis, you're really missing huge parts of the problem. I mean, I think there are a lot of commercial properties that are in need of some type of darkening effort that are wasting light and energy with their current lighting. Now, whether the ordinance addresses that as things need replacing, you do an upgrade to darken things, or whether you want to get aggressive and say, okay, within the next 5 years, everybody has to convert. I don't think that's realistic necessarily, but I certainly think it's something that would be a good idea to put in an ordinance, especially addressing new construction and retrofitting of old construction as it needs renovating and updating. So, I would look at it again as a comprehensive citywide effort, both ordinance and policy for the city itself.
Thanks, Mark. Randy?
A couple of things. One is, at first I thought this was a bright idea, but now I don't know. I think it might be kind of dim. Not dim-witted though. I was gonna, I've spoken with Dave Hansen a number of times about city lighting and so on. And the city is going LED. I mean, when we replace a bulb, it's LED. So I think Mark is right when we should take so I think the city is moving along that path without an ordinance or anything, but it would be a good idea to take a more comprehensive view of the entire city for this. And the Titletown district is in Ashwaubenon. We got no say over Titletown. So I think that's it.
There are pieces that kind of dip into Green Bay though, right? So,
not the Titletown, no. The stadium, yes. Other than that, no.
well, I consider the stadium part of the district, but yeah, I get what you're saying.
That's the Legends District.
Oh, that's the Legends District.
That's the
Okay.
Legends District.
Legends, yeah, down Lombardi.
No, I won't get that wrong again, I promise. Julia had her hand up again too.
Hi again. I definitely agree with Mark that it should be comprehensive. And of course I want this. It's just like, still have questions about how it's actually done. Cause is it the casings themselves or is it actually the light bulbs? Cause yes, I agree that things get replaced. So is it just a matter of replacing it with the right light bulb? What about, are we talking about building codes? Cause I don't know, what are you going to do with the existing lighting that's already up? Does that have to change or is it just new development? I just tried to convince my in-laws to turn off their lights at night and in a rural area. And they said they're on a timer and they don't know how to do that. I don't know. It's just, so I'm just wondering. And then I guess just the fact that you brought up Ashwaubenon being near the Titletown district and I guess, is what I'm not saying I don't want this. I'm just saying, what is the level of lighting that needs to change that we actually can say we're a dark sky community and not really just greenwashing?
Julia, again, I don't know that we would ever get to the point where we could consider ourselves a dark sky community per se. I mean, that would take a really concerted, concentrated effort for every single property basically to get us to that point, but certainly cutting back on the amount of light scatter and light pollution is, I think, the effort. And it isn't just replacing light bulbs. It is actually looking at how the light is situated on any given property, where it's located and how it's, what kind of structure it's in terms of how far below a canopy it may hang, or if it does and doesn't need to be below a canopy. What's the direction of that light? How much light? I mean, you can measure light, the lumens of light and see how bright things are, and looking at standards for that in terms of what do you need for safety purposes versus what do you actually have. You may be 4 or 5 times brighter than you need to be for a certain area, and are you actually hitting it? So there are a lot of things. I mean, there's been a lot of research out there. There's a dark sky organization itself that actually provides a lot of good information. And it's a long-term effort because, again, there are going to be people who are adamant that they need lighting 24/7, outside their residence, let's say, and very bright because of security or the perceived security maybe. But that's going to be part of it as well. So it's a long haul process and it's incremental, but some of it is just providing direction for change as part of this. And I think an ordinance provides a lot of that right there.
And I guess I just want to one follow, and I'm just done based on what you said, Mark. So would it be better to set just make sure we set some goals around what's realistic for our community then to move towards? That's I don't know. I guess that's my last comment.
I come from the planning world. I did a lot of planning, a lot of plans, and the teeth in a plan becomes the ordinances that are enacted based on the goals of that plan. So yeah, I mean, it's important to have a goal to look at, in this case, light reductions, light scatter in some cases, but the ordinance itself is going to be what's going to accomplish that, help to accomplish the goal, or a policy at the city for city staffing, for city public works, and so forth. But it's something that would be enacted as things change, not something where you go through. And Village of Fish Creek, they could go through, when I was working with them in town of Gibraltar, actually, they focused, town of Gibraltar, Fish Creek's not incorporated, so it's the town of Gibraltar, but town of Gibraltar focused on the village of Fish Creek specifically as the area that they wanted to do work in. And they made those changes. They were looking at that ordinance specifically for the village itself, and they had the ability to make changes fairly quickly because it's a small area. But when you're talking Green Bay and the size of the city and all the rest, it's not going to happen that quickly. But it's something that if you set the standards in place through an ordinance, it's a statement of the policy and goals that you're trying to achieve. And so I think it's an important first step, or an important step in the process.
Thanks, Julia and Mark. I did see Melissa's hand up again.
Oh, I just wanted to add, I don't want to, make the discussion too long, but Julia, there are specific standards for dark sky compliant lighting. And so it is, I don't want to say it's easy, but if somebody was retrofitting lighting or putting different wall packs on their building, for example, there are standards set forth by IES, which is the Illuminating Engineering Society. So a lot of time, and that's who has actually drafted that model ordinance that Ned, that I forwarded to everyone before the meeting. So IES has really led the way on this, and there are standards in place for lighting fixtures of all types.
All right. If there's nothing else, it sounds like Mark might be a great resource to follow up with in between meetings. So I'll touch base with Mark and see if we can put something together for December or January. Does that sound good? Cool.
Thanks, Ned. We're going to move on to item 3 then, water resources update, and that is all you, Julia. Take it away.
All right, thanks. Just pull up the agenda really quick, sorry. So I can see what I said I was going to talk about. Sorry, I downloaded it and then it disappeared.
Well, we have enough time for Randy to just tell us that was an illuminating conversation.
It wasn't illuminating. It was very dim-witted.
Thanks, Randy. Thanks for bringing those up, Ned. That's great. So I just, just a couple of things I thought would be good. These are just totally all informational. And since you all care about things going on sustainability related in our city, I thought I'd just give you some updates. So I have greening the city on here. I probably should have put this on here, but I just thinking like water resources doesn't really capture what I like the things I'm thinking about in general. And because it has to do to some degree, it really overlaps with like the pollinator work and then like restoration and just kind of improving our city. So I didn't have a better name for my update, my group update, and you should probably we should avoid saying greening Green Bay because of the negative connotations with blue-green algae and stuff. But so if anyone has any suggestions that more encapsulates kind of like the things that go into there, that's not as wonky as water resources, I'll take any suggestions. I wanted to let people know because maybe some people are living in this area, we have a pretty big project called the East River Resilience Collaborative. We do have an email list if people are interested. We've been working, it's myself or Sea Grant and the Nature Conservancy and New Water have been, and UW Department of Civil and Environmental and Environmental and Civil Engineering Department have been working with all the municipalities, taking a watershed look at the East River and taking a look in terms of flood resilience and really working with them. And so we have had some like on the ground tours that Melissa and Corey have participated in and even talked at. We went and we had field tours that started up in the watershed and looked at these agricultural runoff treatment systems, this potential storage and water quality things, solutions. And then we looked at, floodplain restoration and preservation efforts in Alloway area. And then we ended up in near Van Beaver Park to talk about, what kind of flood resilience stuff was like non-structural that we could work with the communities on, and thinking about like green infrastructure and then emergency preparedness and stuff. So there's some really great efforts around that and momentum. And we're bringing in modeling, like studying the watershed to look at the modeling of how the watershed works and how water flows through the watershed. And we'll have more information about that in the future. And really trying to lay out like nature-based flood resilient solutions and doing some planning around that. So if you're interested, like if you live in that area and you just kind of want to know more, I think this is going to be kind of a long ongoing project. So let me know, or if you have any questions about that. It kind of ties into my next item is the city flood resilience planning. And so as part of the East River Resilience Collaborative, we worked with communities all summer on doing resilience, like assessments or a questionnaire. And right now we're working with the city of Green Bay, close partnership with Melissa, who's like basically co-leading with us this effort. And so we've had one workshop already to talk about flood hazard, to identify flood hazards in the city, and also like the level of community impact the flood hazards are having. And then right now the staff at the city is also working on filling out the questionnaire to talk about resilient type actions that might be of what they might be already doing or could be of interest in the future. And then we'll have a second workshop to actually kind of prioritize some of those flood resilience actions. So that's really exciting, and the staff's been really engaged, and Melissa's just done a really great job getting everyone to the table. And I think we had like 22, 23 staff at the workshop from all different departments. So that's happening. And then I just thought, you might be interested in some of the stuff that's green infrastructure wise that's happening. The one thing that came to mind for this meeting, New Water received a grant, and so they are going to be doing a green infrastructure plan for their property. So I thought that might be of interest to folks. And then last thing I just had was I work with a lot of the restoration folks in the region, and there's just massive efforts going on all the time. And so I'm not sure I've ever known if anybody on this committee knows about most of them, but one of the ones that's directly tied to the city, I just thought I'd share some information about that restoration project since it's kind of nearing the end of the implementation phases, is the Ken Muirs Nature Area. And there's been a lot of great co-benefits that have gone on along this restoration. So they restored, if people don't know where it is, I think it's at the very north end of Military Avenue that dead ends into the bay. It used to be a pretty underutilized park. It's a city park, and there was some public safety concerns there. And they've done working, it's UW Green Bay and Ducks Unlimited. My bad, Ducks Unlimited. And working with the city, so they've gotten a lot of grant money they've restored the dike. So they're trying to create duck habitat and restore coastal wetlands. So they restore the dike, They cut down a lot of the trees to maintain the dike for water, and then it also opened up and created more of a walking path. So apparently there's anecdotally a lot more birders out there. It's a great place to go birding. And also they just installed, which was a several-year project in the bay. I don't know if people have seen it on the news, but it's a woody break wall. And so they took a lot of the trees down from the dike and they like anchored them to the bottom of the bay, and they're kind of sticking out, and it spans like 2,000 feet in 3 sections. And it's meant to slow down the waves and attenuate all that wave energy so that it can help the plants, the wetland plants behind it grow again for wildlife habitat and nesting habitat, and just part of that. So I just thought people might be interested to know, like, if you haven't been out there in a while, it would be a really nice place to go. And it's like an active, like a major successful, so forth, restoration site located in the city. So, and I have some information or pictures I can share of before and after too. And they're managing invasive species out there too. So I think the next stages they're looking for, one last thing about that area. They've been seeding wild rice out there for the last few years too. So in the future, it would be great if they could do some native plantings along the roadway and the parking area, and then continue to manage invasive stuff too. So that's all I had. I just thought people would be interested in some of the things that are happening sustainability wise that we don't talk about much.
Thanks for all of those updates and for all of that work, Julia. Really, really appreciate all of that. Do we have any questions before moving on to item 4 for Julia?
Just real quick, Julia, the work you're doing along the East River, I don't know if Melissa will be talking about it at all, but there's probably some things we're doing between the city and school district as well, looking at some green infrastructure at a couple school sites along that area as well. So I'll get in touch with you and see if we can coordinate some plans.
That's great. Oh, and then there was you just reminded me, along the East River there, we did for a grant to do some working with the parks and Corey and other municipalities up the East River, is to replacing some of that underutilized turf grass and looking at taking out or more properly managing water that can be dangerous issues, and then also doing some engineering design for certain like wetland restoration up the river, and then actually seeding some areas that were underutilized. And that got brought up a few meetings ago. So that's really good too. And I think that's great that I'll put that on the list. Green infrastructure at schools. That's awesome.
Awesome. Any other questions for Julia before moving on? All right, thanks again, Julia. Melissa, Resilience Coordinator updates.
Let me just get my camera on. Yeah, so you guys have touched on a lot of the things that I'm working on. So especially Julia with the East River Resiliency Collaborative. We've been really engaging with the neighborhood quite a bit, and sort of a side outreach project that came out of the collaborative was doing a community or a neighborhood survey. And I may have mentioned this in a previous meeting, but we just concluded a neighborhood survey in Joanne's neighborhood, which borders the East River, and also some of the other adjacent neighborhoods that are in the flood zone that have areas of their neighborhood that have been impacted by past flooding. And that closed October 30th. It was a targeted survey just for those households located in that area. There's about 850 households that we sent postcards to, and it was an online survey. We've received about 144 responses, which is pretty good. And it's a resilience survey. It wasn't just about flood resilience. It was about neighborhood resilience in general, social connectedness, what people, how they feel about their neighborhood, in times of emergency, do they have people to reach out to in their neighborhood? So it's really an overall resiliency survey. And the city collaborated with United Way and the Nature Conservancy and Neighbor Works and Wello on that. So hopefully in the coming month or two, we'll be able to get some help on board to do the survey analysis. I think United Way is going to be able to support us in that effort. So more to come on that. And the results, the plan, for at least from my perspective, and why we really got involved with it, the city, was to be able to use some of those results in our flood resiliency plan for the city to see what people need and how we can improve the resiliency in those areas. The other update in regards to green infrastructure, Ned touched on it. We haven't identified specific schools to my knowledge, but we're talking with the DNR, so hopefully we can drum up some funding for some pilot projects at a couple of schools in Green Bay for green infrastructure. And the Public Works Department is going to be doing 4 or 5 pilot projects for green infrastructure in 2022, in conjunction with some road reconstruction projects that have already been slated. So that's really exciting. There'll be a variety of green infrastructure from permeable pavers to permeable asphalt, to engineered engineered tree pits for stormwater capture. So more to come on that. What else? There's a couple of grants that I'll be working on. One is a comprehensive energy planning grant through the Public Service Commission of Wisconsin. And that's coming up in January. So I might be reaching out to certain members of our commission for potential assistance with that grant and letters of support, because the comprehensive energy planning will be a major aspect of our climate action plan. What else? I'm also working on a Wisconsin Coastal Resilience Initiative grant. And let's see what else. Oh, and then the staff workshop that Julia talked about in her update. It's been received really very well. We had 8 different departments represented and 20 some people participate in that virtual workshop. And we have an ArcGIS map that people have been using to identify specific points in the city where we identified flood hazards, and then we're ranking their level of impact in the community. So it's been very helpful, and it's just really great to see all different perspectives coming into play with identifying different hazards, and what's perceived as a hazard to one person is not a hazard to another person. So it's been a good process, and hopefully we can have our final workshop. I'm hoping sometime in December, Julia, but I don't know if we're gonna meet that target at this point. Any other questions? Are there any questions for me? Okay.
All right, thanks for the updates and all of the great work as per usual, Melissa. We'll move on to the last item here, just a free space round robin for any other updates have been shared. I just have one thing. You can see in the agenda here, we're not going to be having a meeting in December, but going into January, Melissa and I are talking about how we can virtually have an effective planning meeting to map out some of our goals and priorities and workflows for 2022. For those that have been on the commission for a few years, you might recall we did so in 2019 and 2020, and this darn pandemic just kind of threw a monkey wrench in that for 2021, but we're picking it back up again. So with that in mind, definitely, individually be thinking about some of the priorities that you want to focus on. I know we have some ongoing works like the green infrastructure, the climate action plan, the Pollinator corridor work. So think about the work that you want to do, the vision for the commission in the year and beyond. And then I would like to just check in individually with all of y'all before the new year. Some of y'all I've talked to recently, but would love to have a phone call or a Zoom or a in-person coffee meeting, which in 2021 feels like a lot more exciting than it used to, having in-person meetings. So would definitely love that. But yeah, that's all I have. If anybody else has any updates though, feel free to hop in.
I'll throw this out there. One of what I think of or look at as exciting trends in my industry, in the waste industry especially, is recent California legislation that basically it's recyclability of legislation statewide, that any product sold in the state of California has to be able to be recycled by 60% of the population in the area that they're covering. They can't advertise, so the little symbol that's on the bottom of all your plastic containers that isn't really a recycling symbol would go away. All the claims about recycling many of them would go away as well, because not nearly as much is recyclable as people think. So it's a truth in recycling law that has a 5-year implementation window. And because California has such a large effect on the market in general, it'll be very interesting to see what kind of effect this has nationwide. But we look at it as a positive effort, since we can't directly impact recycling in this state, but to the extent we'd like to, this may be something that indirectly affects it. So stay tuned.
Truth in recycling. If you're recycling truth, is it really true?
Is it an old truth or a new truth? It's.
I guess I mentioned to Seth before the meeting, I had a meeting with Representative Shelton, and would like to maybe set aside some time at our meetings a few times a year to look at what are some of the bills being proposed in Madison that have to do with some of the work we're doing, and not to make recommendations on those bills, but just to be apprised of what they're talking about down there, and pull some inspiration to do some work locally. So just wanted to share that.
If I can make a shameless plug to that point, and recognize my bias of my day job, Wisconsin Conservation Voters does have a vote or a bill tracker online. If you go to conservation.org, what we do, there's a vote tracker. Any bill dealing with land, air, water, or democracy, since democracy is an environmental issue, we'll have and we take stances on the bills, of course, as an advocacy organization, but it will have a pretty solid description if folks want to. You can even sign up for updates. It's super fascinating stuff.
Actually, I have one thing. Now that you brought up Christina Shelton, it jogged the old memory. I also spoke to her. I got an issue going on the northwest side with the rail yard, and it actually fits in with some of the stuff we talked about. Is they've put up some lighting that is remarkably bright and shines out from the yard into the neighborhood. Plus, it's always pretty noisy there. So I've talked to her about seeing what since there's not much the city can do. I started with Grenier to put up barriers and do something about the lighting and the noise for noise and light pollution. So on the northwest side, it's not much fun there. So hopefully the state can jump in and do a little something for them.
Any other updates from folks?
Motion to adjourn?
All right, I wasn't sure if that was going to be a final joke or
Second.
motion to adjourn by Randy, second by Ned. All those in favor say aye.
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 All those opposed say nay. All right, thanks everybody. See you all in January, but we'll talk before that.
Merry Christmas.
Merry
Have a good
Christmas.
holidays.
Happy Thanksgiving.
Happy Festivus.
For the rest of us.